Chilly here with Sirius Dallas Moon. Mercury, well, Moon is 15 degrees Virgo, Mercury 12 degrees Pisces, Mars is 22 in Pisces, Venus in rest to Taurus. Now, for the first 5 degrees of Venus in Taurus, she is applying to square Pluto, so we don't get the Venus exalted talisman for those who are sensitive to the outer planets. For other ones, um, we may get a lovely chance to have a Venus talisman um, later, perhaps next week, or this week if somebody's Libra doesn't fall in a really weird house. Um, Venus is in her home sign, and I actually want to talk about the end of Chiron in Aries and the beginning of Chiron in Taurus, which we will have this year. So, Chiron in Aries has been healing our sense of self, sovereignty, um, our way in the world. Whether if we grew up in places or cultures where we were required to adapt to other people's ways excessively, Chiron would require us to abandon that. Chiron is also the wounded healer where crisis upon crisis, for many people around the world, if it didn't arrive in like mental health or any other thing, then it definitely did arrive in COVID, where we had to go against the best advice of the best, most well-intending doctors, even if those doctors were not corrupt at all. Um, if we were in consultation or medical professions, we may have found that our patients resonated with something and then found something in what we do going against what is even healthy for them. Um, and so patient sovereignty became something that we're aware that is needed if we are to be honest. Um, and yet the way to go about it also had a wounding. Um, Sometimes we may have even discovered that the lack of patient sovereignty was perpetuating the cause of the disease. And and that can go to both physical, mental, and holistic healing practices. Neptune, with entrepreneurship and innovation, we may have discovered the wounds around being self-employed. Certain people may have worked for a corporation or worked as um, even a contractor and discovered that they are independent, that they are either being asked to hold accountable for things that were not a part of the job title, or that that maybe if they are working for somebody, they can depend on dependability of the business, finding out that is not so. Alternatively, the people went towards entrepreneurship and discovered that it was way less independent than they thought. Um, but that being not a point of relief, but a point of wounding, which they would need to curate. Um, Mars here is also our way. And again, those who thought, yeah, I can adapt to myself is not a problem, may have run into places where they were asked to adapt to something that negates their I am. And then they had to insist, even if the culture or the corporate culture or usually it can happen with international cultures, was not um, usually supportive of that, or would see that as an overly independent person or as not a team player. Many people had to deal with the wound of not being able to be a team player because that would mean negating the sense of self. Politically, for people that were in those fields, they may have had challenge to build a coalition because Aries here requires a sense of self and requires the I am, and building a coalition requires adaptability that here could have been negated. By the way, the years of Chiron in Aries, there have been many governments that had had consecutive attempts to build a government, even in democracies. So the crisis of representation, the good part of that can be the separations that we've seen from Davos, where people decided to individualize themselves. And it can even be that Chiron worked here as something that requires the image of an act of individuation became a fake it till you make it. So there can be also accidental healing because Mars rules accidents. Um, Anything to do with the identity. So with Chiron wounds to the identity, we're talking about the topic of ritual abuse, sexual abuse, rape of boys, um, became a bit more, particularly after the Me Too, became a bit more possible to discuss or possible to address. And I say a bit. The issue of the brotherhoods, because Mars rules also brotherhoods, the wounds around fraternities in particular, can be sororities, but here's mainly Mars sign. I saw even in terms of communities, for those that Aries is like the 11th house, um, there are people attempting to have separate sex communities, hoping that it would tame up certain unwanted, what they call sexual. Now, it's also, Aries can also be the one around being naive in that case, and they were reminded that fraternities weren't bringing the best of both sexes. Fraternities and sororities. Um, the topic of sense of self and ritual abuse. Mars here would be the violation act of ritual abuse, and the need to curate a sense of self, whether by having no medicine or by having different approaches and different ways, where the way here is the healing. With Chiron, finding one's own way is one's own healing. Um, Sexually, we may have been exposed to the fact that different sexual orientations are non-negotiable, and at the same time, wounding and miraculous healing to what people thought was sexual orientations, but were traumas. And that could be a very wide spectrum of, of phenomena. Um, Mars rules business and real estate, curation too. For example, Europe right now is changing up the reality of credit cards that don't connect to the bank and allowing people to have a debit card that immediately charges from the bank, even in countries where that was not possible, like Netherlands, or that there was a wound around the business system or the credit system, giving people more control over their immediate expenses, not having to postpone payments and pay interest. Um, Participation in trade. And by the way, this is a time to remember that this is I don't know how long of the world fighting for the Strait of Hormuz, um, and the relevant and associated oil, while neither the Strait of Hormuz for oil nor for shipping is necessary for international aviation and energy that is ecosystemic and can power the world. Okay? We're basically having one of the most useless wars ever. And if the point is to alleviate human rights violations, then respective countries can perhaps begin within. Okay, the good thing about the rise of the oil prices and the fear or the expectation that the oil prices will raise to $200 a barrel is that we're definitely going electric after this one. And that can be in itself an incentive for war. Chiron is also the wound around war, and um, what we've seen in the last years was war in Ukraine, war in Israel Palestine, and war in Ukraine that sparked the entire NATO to defend against Russia um, and its allied forces, and war in Israel Palestine, and war with Iran. We were talking about three focal destinations that have been long awaiting um, an actual intervention. Whether we like the type of intervention that happened or not, these three focal planes, whether it's Iran, whether it's Israel Palestine, whether it's Ukraine Russia, have been calling for doing something about it, which is Aries, for quite a while. Chiron here brings the wound of what was done. Okay. And yet, um, what does Chiron leave to Neptune? Chiron leaves a legacy where we cannot ignore that violation of sovereignty on any level, energy, sex, um, business, real estate, economy, um, harms himself and make it people irrational. And that the antidote to that cannot be more violation. Um, Certain people began to tend to the art of war and thus began to see what is war and what is siphoning energy, namely what brings peace and what creates perpetual war. All the planets after Aries go to Taurus, and Taurus is a fixed earth sign. It's not a fixed war sign. Um, the fact that we have an outer planet in Aries does make the Taurus placement important because in Taurus we see the day after the war. I was looking at Milagro Intentional Community or co-housing, where they made poop grow trees in the desert and yet preserve the desert with its natural habitat and natural species, solar panels and gathering water from the roofs. It's in Tucson. Um, Houses that are built ecosystemically to preserve temperature and prevent excess heat. And people that retired building something in the last decade that perhaps needs a continuation. Um, so when we think about curation of wounding around housing, um, those can be some examples that we don't need barrels of oil to build a community, and building a new community doesn't necessitate destroying nature. So, of course, this is one example of many examples. Um, Mars does rule real estate, and Chiron here is the wound around real estate. For example, in Israel, after the war, the safety rooms became a requirement, and even very elaborated housing that did not have safety room suddenly was not selling. Um, Also, real estate and the issue of people who require people to be raped for real estate, or people who own landlords who own, or people who own real estate and rape or create wounds towards whether it's the tenant, whether the tenants are young businesses or youngpreneurs or individuals. And those people have discovered that the implications of such actions um, are dire, dire and terrible and wounding, and they can no longer say this is work, or the person agreed to that, or that was the person was looking for, because essentially they will not get rid of the harm they brought upon the lineages until no such things exist in the business and real estate and natural resources sectors worldwide. Zero rape, zero slavery, zero energy siphoning. People became aware of those, and it became a discussed issue. Aries is also the mind, and no longer will basically rape be justified by culture, by religion. This of Chiron Mars. Chiron is wounding all residues of irrationality regarding justifying rape. Justifying rape is basically a form of Mein Kampf. Um, and it creates inflammation, it creates disease, it creates harm to sense of self, and it creates and perpetuates irrational actions that can only be rationalized not by petroleum and neurotoxins prescribed as medicine, but by abolition of rape and slavery and energy siphoning from the real estate, from the natural resources, from the business sectors. People that have problem with that, people that build their retirement on raping people, find that they have planned, there's a wounding to their endeavors. And they may find it out at war, or what they thought the war will achieve the opposite for those who raped or profited off of trafficking people. Again, it's the domain of Ares. And those who raped and sacrificed even for Ares, they will have the worst possible outcome of this transit. Chiron is their last call to create before Neptune comes. And Neptune is a global issue. Neptune is like, well, you cannot beat a devil with a devil. But for a devil comes always a bigger devil. Okay? The people that raped tenants astrally and made it so that the tenants had to evacuate. And they couldn't, they even left family pictures and so on, or slaughtered the tenants' pets and so on. Then all the building had to evacuate, and then the building was not selling. because it had no safety room. Or even if somebody bought the estate, they had to deal with the implications of the previous things. Estates exploded. Mars also rules litigation. Um, and even offices that dealt with litigations against Epstein. And I will show you one of them. This is Reinhold Gufa Ruffo, Plotkin and Hellman LLP, New York. This is basically a response where I said that I've been targeted by Epstein ring or something similar this year, and it is so much so that I don't know how they can even represent me. To have how do they even have certificate of lawyers without raping children? This is my level of trust in the world, and this is their reply. Appreciate your confidence you've expressed in our firm, but however, review upon situation. They had no review upon the situation, but one email they decline representation, basically stating the obvious that, and these are the people I contacted them because they claimed that they brought settlements to survivors of Epstein ring. So they were supposed to be experts on the issue. This was from Ethan Cohen. So the wound around litigation. How do they get certification without raping children? Who are we to trust to represent? And Supreme Court, I think it would be Libra. And the fact that when it comes to rape, both the communication but also the trust in is violated, and this office is basically unprofessional and incompatible in representing victims of rape, astral or not, because the response is unadaptable to the situation of litigation following rape. And they have not transparently addressed my very legitimate question: how did they get certification in the fact that this ring infiltrated academia, the training of practitioners, jurisdiction, national political authorities, global business? How do they have a lawyer's office without raping children, without trafficking, or without justifying rape under any guise? Hey, rape is not work, rape is not housing, and so on and so forth. So they have shown themselves unprofessional, incompatible in tending to these topics with transparency. And Mars rules names. So the wound around the name. Chiron here addresses the wound where, what about the people that were the victims and had no way to clear their name that was done upon them? Chiron is conjoining Aries right now, which is the elite. Now let's talk a little bit about the upcoming Chiron in Taurus. Chiron in Taurus is going to address the wound around having land. And it's going to accentuate the fact that healing, whether it's from sexual abuse, Healing our own voice, living in accordance with our values requires land. And requires, it will also address wounds around sororities, sisterhoods, and lady traffickers or madams. Venus rules fertility, sensuality, appearance, arts, value, and also banking and business. Chiron will address the wounds around all of those. The place of women in trade and banking. The role of the feminine in trade and banking. By the way, Chiron rules rage in Aries. And those who take their rage on the victim, those who take their rage on those who were raped, those who try to claim that the person that was raped had it coming, they are going to face the fury of Ares before they face the fury of Beta per se, which is dead bodies upon dead bodies, death to all their lineages but those that go against rape. All that they wish to achieve by siphoning energy is going to collapse upon them. And the helplessness that people had in the face of these actions will manifest into collateral mass deaths. And certain people will experience the mass deaths as curating because for them it means that the people that raped them died. And the communities that believe that the rapist are turning into mass graves, it's almost a meditation. Remember, in the death and concentration camps, nobody cared what anybody was wearing. Those who want to control the water in the concentration camps, people drank whatever water they had, if they had. And but the ghettos were for the wealthiest of the elites and the commonest of people. But Chiron in Taurus is going to accentuate the importance of the voice, the speaking up, the singing, the expressing as healing. If the right of the public to know guided the name's exposures in Aries, the co-presence of Chiron Aries and Saturn Neptune in Aries was the Epstein files. Then in Taurus, the voice itself, for example, women singing is medicine. Women having land is medicine. No rape on the land is about healing from war, but the caution, the women that said that the Me Too went too far, may face themselves challenges around land, expressing their voice, creative arts, vehicles, participation in banking, and so on and so forth. Venus rules value, and Chiron is curating the wound around our value by embodiment. I remember after the Me Too, Uranus ingressed into Taurus. There was this business of jade eggs, and it was reminding people that sexual trauma is not just a rape, but also if a person is not ready, and so on and so forth. And then people began to apply that, and then they began to heal from candida. Some of them had alleviation in all kinds of fifth vital sign related issues. Again, societal changes are also needed. Not to have medications with estrogen to things that are growing in the body like cysts. Okay, but this is basis. If you think about, for example, IVF, because both people that have such things need usually IVF, and IVF itself is not so sensitive on the body. Chiron in Taurus will definitely address those things in depth. I don't know if it gets to be co-present with Uranus. But it would also address the relation between rape and difficulty in fertility. Unions, sisterhoods, the wounds around them can be curated by each going according to her own value and representing her own voice. Land has to be to each woman for all the sisterhood to heal. Okay, so for example, woman that says, "Oh, sex work is work," blah 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 blah. Well, she needs to make sure that no women are trafficked and no women are raped, and all women have land without requirement for them to have sex or to be raped for land, and are able to creatively express it themselves. If she can do that, maybe people will believe that there is such thing as sex positive sex work. Medically is impossible, by the way. It harms the endocrine system, it creates inflammation, creates issues to the fifth vital sign, increases susceptibility to mental health, can cause susceptibility to addictions. It's not the people that get addicted get into this. Of course, those things can happen, but the preliminary history of sexual boundary violation, because people are put forcibly on drugs by traffickers, even under the guise of medical drugs or psychiatric drugs, which is reason enough for psychiatrists to be slaughtered, and this is completely legal. It's self-defense. Patient sovereignty, patient sovereignty, patient sovereignty, patient sovereignty, patient sovereignty. Um, Wounds around food and eating, again, when addressing embodiment, sexuality only with will and consent, cultures that have no self-pleasure allowed, unhealthy cultures. And cultures with self-pleasure was wounded due to sexual boundary violation, people will address that with embodiment. Um, the wound around tantric communities that pretended to bring that healing, but were actually rapey or trafficky, will be addressed in full. And the voices, the healing, the voices will be a part of the healing. It's not so much a legal sign as much as it is an embodied sign, but this serves as the basis that changes anything to do with litigation and persecution or contracts within Gemini. For example, if a person does not have land, next sign is Gemini, which is trade, and any contract, let's say tenants, as long as they are homeless people, renting a place is an invalid NDA. It's going to be severely extended with Pluto in Aquarius, where people become very aware that the hoarding of wealth was energy siphoning by ritual abuse and rape of the people, and this is why wealth redistribution is uh, is done with zero rape, zero slavery, and zero energy siphoning, and this is basically the origin of life energy of each person, which includes land, which includes natural resources, which include their own housing needs for survival, food, and so on and so forth. And when that was siphoned, people believed that they need to pay for housing or pay for land, which is irrational and inconceivable. I myself only realized that with Chiron in Aries. Um, so in that sense, the people that said that when they do that to people, it enlightens them. Okay. Um, then what happens when people are awakening? Yes, you are correct, Satanists. I was ignorant of the fact that my life energy has to be sustained with zero rape, zero slavery, zero energy siphoning, which I did not know was going on since my birthing. And this is my birthright, and this is also my real estate and natural resources, and right to defend myself. And that the violation of that is crime against humanity, punishable by death, but not death by torture, but death that is quick, effective, and does not perpetuate, let's say, satanic ritual abuse or ritual abuse sacrifice. So yeah, that was enlightening, and I am enlightened. That's the enlightenment. So I'm awakened to that fact. Um, and yes, the fact that it happened also to me, and not just in some Ekveld in a monastery to children that were born in unregistered birth, um, did expose me to the fact that such things exist. Okay, those are things that I cannot deny. Probably if I would hear about this happening to somebody else, because it's so remote, I would wonder if it is Chisbat, okay, if it is something like a dark tale, or if actually such things happen in the world, and it would not permeate consciousness. For example, when I was in high school, people were talking about satanic abuse or people sacrificing pets, and it was a terrible reality, but there was something so dissociative about this that it was difficult to understand, and wonder how many people I went to high school with that were participating in such rituals, maybe even dissociated from this fact. So at that point, I cannot deny that. Um, would I rather for it to be different? Yes, of course. I think tending to rare cases and understanding that what seems like a fable can very well be real is important. Um, and definitely, I can say that ignoring our human rights or compromising our human rights or believing that we don't know where wealth come from, not knowing that it's innate to our life energy, and that zero rape, zero slavery, zero energy siphoning is a must for humanity to not go extinct. Um, yeah, those are all things that spiritual warfare made very accurate, and crystal clear for me. It also made it crystal clear for me that if I thought, well, I don't see myself as sex worker ever. for me, very important. Sexuality would to be with love and would to be honoring the sense of self. And I said, well, this is me. I cannot speak for all people in the world. Definitely, spiritual welfare taught me that there is no such thing as sex work, and all of it is ritual abuse, rape, and torture to such a degree that we would need to take the C factor of global slavery, rape, and torture and ritual abuse from the equation for anybody to claim that they are sex worker. And it's okay to kill people who advocate for what they call is sex work, even if they say, oh, that's my only income. Well, this has on the scale harmed the ability to have housing, income, and even wish to live of people that were affected by things that say sex work is work. I was never so crystal clear about this before spiritual warfare. I said, well, for me that feels like rape, but maybe this is personal. I don't see myself able to do such thing without desiring to slaughter all humanity in the most gruesome ways, but perhaps it is only me. As long as I could live individually without that being a risk to me, then I could say, well, maybe my feelings, maybe I'm too sensitive. Uh, Maybe I'm what they call the soft skull. But spiritual warfare made it very clear to me that this is a raison d'etre, that this is a one truth, that this is a truth that cannot be questioned, and I repent all my previous attempt to question the fact that there is any such thing where rape can be justified in sex work, or that there is any such thing as sex work. I thought that this is true only to me, and I thought, and I didn't want to be conceitful in assuming for others. But on the scale, if those things happen, rape, torture, ritual abuse, blame shifting, to, torture to people having to say that sex work is work when they are being trafficked, torture until people become traffickers because they can no longer be raped physically and they try to get away and they cannot even die. Well, and as long as that exists, no one has the right to say that they are sex worker. And it's okay to kill people who say sex work is work or the Me Too went too far, because this is prevention of continuation of rape and torture. That is definitely how I was enlightened by the experiences that I went through.